Hi, everyone. I'm Natalie Gochner. This is Both Sides of the Aisle, and I am so excited today to have Shireen Gorbani on the left.
Hello. Hey, listeners. You're in for a treat.
And a special guest, Preston Brightwell, not on the right, but representing a evergreen topic, Shireen.
Yeah.
The Dignity Index, dignity in public life.
Yes. So a little peek behind the curtains. Usually around Christmas and then also around the 4th of July, we take a little break. So we want to bring to you some content about things that are happening in our state that are a little bit more not so tied to the day-to-day news, but really hopefully helpful frameworks for either in the past we've done a little bit of our own stories and backgrounds, but today we're taking a deep dive into something that's really exciting that is being grown and fostered right here at the University of Utah.
Yeah. So Preston, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Definitely. I am a Salt Lake native. I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah. Love that I get to call Utah my home and my background to some degree as we go national, and I tell people where I'm from and how much I love the state, and I'm so excited that this project kind of originated here. I went to the University of Utah for both my undergrad and graduate school. Mm-hmm. I did political science in my undergrad, and I did a master's of public administration for my grad school.
So now you're the field director for the Dignity Index. Tell people, what is the Dignity Index?
Yeah, definitely. The Dignity Index is a project that was launched by a group called Unite, which is a nonprofit based out in D.C. led by Tim Shriver.
And Tim Shriver, Shireen, someone you know well.
Well, I don't know him well.
Yeah, I've seen you interact with him, and you guys are friendly.
I had the opportunity to interact with him. I served in the Peace Corps.
Oh, very nice,
Tim Shriver's father, Sergeant Shriver, was the first director of the Peace Corps, really at the inception of that incredible organization. And I named my dog Sergeant Shriver, so my dog's name is Sarge. And when I met him, I just thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to meet Tim Shriver. This is like, a person who's part of the Kennedy, just this huge family.
Nephew of President Kennedy.
Oh my goodness, yeah. So you're just sitting there, and I'm thinking, do I tell this person that I named my dog after his dad? And just kind of watching him interact, I thought, he's going to like it. I told him. It was the sweetest reaction. And I just remember, I just said, I served in the Peace Corps. Thank you for your family's service and contribution, and then I just said, and I named my dog Sarge. And somebody in the room goes, who's Sarge? And he says, my dad.
Oh, no.
So kind of fun. But so Tim is one of the founders of the Dignity Index. What does it do?
Yeah, it's a 1 to 8 scale that really kind of measures how we treat each other in moments of disagreement. You can use it to analyze our speech, our language in that kind of moment of conflict. 1 to 8 scale, 1 through 4 being the contempt side. Those scores are roughly kind of, contempt and, strong language, hateful language at times. And then 5 through 8 is the dignity side. That really is when you get into curiosity, humility, authenticity. Those are that's the kind of dignity.
Isn't this fun, Shireen?
Yeah. So
and fun to think that it's being birthed right here in Salt Lake City at our flagship institution.
Yeah. So how did that connection start?
Yeah. I mean, you go ahead, Preston. I can give my color commentary, but
yeah, definitely.
But essentially, President Randall wants to create unsurpassed societal impact.
Yeah.
And had this idea to bring in impact scholars, people that are public intellectuals, people that have are thought leaders that we bring to Salt Lake City, to the state of Utah, and share their background. And one of those is Arthur Brooks, but another one is Tim Shriver. Right. And he's, his mother, he's chair of the Special Olympics presently. His mother sort of founded the Special Olympics. His dad was the senior guy in the Peace Corps, but he's got this in his blood.
Yeah.
Well, and much credit to the University of Utah as well. Taylor and Natalie as well. They came in and really, I think, gave life to this vision that Tim and his team, and I can't, we would be remiss not to mention Tammy Pfeiffer, who worked for Governor Herbert for a long time and is kind of the Utah element of the founding group. And
it essentially serves in a chief of staff role for the Unite project, the Dignity Project. She's a mover and a shaker, and many people will know her. She's held elected office in Utah. She's been the education advisor to Governor Herbert, sang in the Tabernacle at Temple Square.
Oh,
So she's got a lot of neat aspects to Tammy.
Utah ground, definitely. And so it's even this funny juxtaposition, which we don't have to get into, but this Tammy and Tim, like them together, their stories, their backgrounds, it's like this incredible mix.
Catholic, a Mormon, a man, a woman.
Democrat, Republican, rural, urban, it's just like this cool combination. And I think really is a testament to the core of the message of the Dignity Index and why it works. But again, it really was just this collaboration between them having this vision, bringing it to Utah, Taylor and Natalie, all these people from the University of Utah that really kind of gave it life, hired the students that came in, that learned how to use it in our application for the midterm elections, last election cycle that we applied it to. That was our pilot project, went super well.
And when you say applied it to, what does that mean? What are you doing?
Definitely. In that pilot project iteration, we trained students how to use the Dignity Index, which was what are the levels, how does it work, how do you apply it to language? And then we looked at election language, campaign language, debates,
fundraising letters,
Twitter, tweets, all that stuff. And we gave it scores on the Dignity Index,
So you're coding,
Yeah.
right? You're reading a passage and you're saying, is this a 4? Is this an 8?
Yeah. So let me give a couple of examples because I happen to have the Dignity Index in front of me. First of all, I want to note that it does say right below the title, the Dignity Index, it says ease divisions, prevent violence, solve problems. The violence piece really stands out to me because I do believe that when we have dehumanizing language, it is easier to enact violence on people.
Absolutely.
And I really feel like we're in a bit of a heyday of violent language that is creating a lot of, I think, really scary times for people, tumultuous times for people. Certainly people of targeted groups when we think about the conflicts that we're seeing in Israel and Gaza and the way that then that's translating to stories about people, right? And how we're thinking about the actual on the ground consequences of dehumanization, right? Yeah. We know a long history of what anti-Semitism has meant, the kind of violence that's been perpetuated around that. Islamophobia is similar, right? But here are some of the things. So an example of a 1, and again, a 1 is a score you do not want. They're not even human. It's our moral duty to destroy them before they destroy us. And then, like, let's say in the middle. So this would be like a 4, 5, 4, which is still on the contempt side. So bad. We don't like this, right? We're better than those people. I don't trust them. That I hear a lot. Now, tipping just to the other side of that, just to the other side. And this feels like a shift we could do. So from a 4 to a 5, the other side has a right to be here and a right to be heard. It's their country too. And then all the way up to 8, which is the example. Each one of us is born with inherent worth. So we treat everyone with that dignity, no matter what. So what you're saying is students were trained to then go look at campaign materials, websites, tweets, fundraising emails, what they actually said in the debates, and give people a score.
Yeah, and just a quick nuance to that, we weren't necessarily giving people a score. We were because
the speech a score.
Yeah, we were giving their language, because what we saw in the project is that a candidate or a person could be over the course of a speech could be a 7, and then they could drop down to a 2 or a 3, and then could go back up to a 7.
Yeah,
So it really was kind of those moments of conflict.
Super interesting. Yeah, you can tell he's done a lot of this, Shireen, and a couple of aha moments for our listeners. Keep in mind that you have people from all different backgrounds doing this coding on the political spectrum, their gender, their socioeconomics, race.
Yeah.
And so you get diversity in who's coding it. And then you bring your coding of that passage to a room and you talk about it. And you see if you can reach consensus on what it should be coded. And that's how you arrive at how is it coded.
And did you feel there was often conflict there, or was it often people were kind of like, ooh, we're kind of in the same neighborhood?
Yeah, it was actually it was the latter, and I think surprisingly so. I mean, I came into the group, and I'm open about this, very conservative, very right, and I was on teams with people who I knew for sure were on the other side, and I was stunned how often we would, before we even had the conversation, we were at the same score.
Yeah,
and this is what was pioneered at the University of Utah, is this idea that it actually worked.
Right,
that you could code passages and do something that was valid.
Yeah. Superseded political ideology.
Uh-huh.
You could see it. And people were being honest. They're like, I see it in my side. I see it in, the other side, but I see it in my side.
So this was my aha moment. As we were testing this, I read 2 passages of presidential, presidents, candidates, whatever. One was President Donald Trump's speech at, I believe it was National Archives, and it was on immigration.
Yeah.
And it was just horrible.
Yeah.
On the index.
On
or
the
bad.
index.
Yeah. Could have been bad
It was calling
speaking.
people names.
Yep.
It was making assumptions about things. It was, it was creating an us or them
Yeah.
kind of environment. At the same time, I also read a passage from President Biden that was his MAGA Republican speech, where he's calling all sorts of names and saying things that I thought were unfair and unreasonable. Anyway, it was a real aha moment for me because I saw both of these, candidates giving speeches that were 2s.
Yeah.
And sometimes you think on my side, we're 5s and the other side are 2s. But just go look around, everybody.
Yeah.
It's really bad. It's
Yeah.
pervasive in our society.
Yeah. So I hope when we come back from our break that we're able to talk about kind of what are the next steps for this? How are you hoping it gets used? And I'd love to know if you have a personal connection to this. Like, why is this work important to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's take a short break. Natalie Gochner with Preston Brightwell and Shireen Gurbani. Stay tuned, everybody.
You're listening to Both Sides of the Aisle on Utah Public Radio. We love to hear from listeners like you. If you would like to send us a comment, email bsotapodcast@gmail.com. That's bsotapodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. I'm Shireen Gurbani.
I'm Preston Brightwell.
And I'm Natalie Gochner, and this is Both Sides of the Aisle. And we are so excited today to be talking about the Dignity Index and this movement, Shireen and Preston, to have more dignity in our lives.
Yeah.
And you can think of it as this spectrum from dignity to contempt. Let's just talk about contempt for a minute.
Okay. Yeah.
The only reason I'm thinking about this is I've done enough reading on this and talking about it. I've learned that one of the most common signs of contempt is someone who rolls their eyes.
Yeah.
And I told my husband that. And now anytime he rolls his eyes, I comment on it. And he's like, oh, you always do that. But Preston, I've heard you talk about the contempt industrial complex. What is that?
Yeah, the way we look at the contempt industrial complex, and I got to credit a bit Arthur Brooks. I think we pull a quote from him that he says that those exact words. It's really just this contempt culture that we see in our country, whether it's the media that we're consuming, the way that our politicians speak, the way we treat each other. It's really, how, the profiteers of contempt, we're going to push contempt as our message because that's what gets clicks, that's what gets likes, that's what gets votes, that's what gets money. And it's as much as it's the media feeding it to us, it's as much us for, clicking on it, clicking on that clickbait.
What we watch,
Right.
what we post,
Yeah,
What we consume.
what
Absolutely.
we say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm guilty of it.
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Me too.
And Shireen, this is a perfect topic for both sides of the aisle because the whole premise of this program is that we're friends.
Yes. And
We have different opinions and we're friends.
This is right. So I think it's confusing. I think it can be confusing, especially to some of my friends when I'm sitting across from a legislator who is, passing legislation that I think is really harming people I care about deeply. But I also believe that if we do not stay in conversation, that we will never get anywhere, right? And then I think even further, not only disengaging from conversation, but then also starting to deny that individual's humanity in a way that I sometimes feel like they have denied others, right? I think only perpetuates a cycle of violence and doesn't, again, allow for us to say, okay, I know that somewhere in there we have some shared values. I have to believe that. I have to believe that you fundamentally think trans kids have value or whatever it may be, right?
Yeah.
I think you have to believe that somewhere inside. How do we move that into action? And I don't think that I can help or at least even stay in honest conversation if I don't believe that there is something, that there is a dignity at the heart of that person I'm talking to.
Yeah, and so they use the term, and Preston, you can elaborate on this, but that dignity is inherent.
Yeah.
It's not earned. You don't earn dignity. You're, in my faith tradition, you're a son or daughter of God. Yeah. And as a child of God, you have dignity.
Yeah.
But Preston, when you're out in the field, and tell us about what you're doing at other universities and things, but this is a movement that's spreading.
Yeah, definitely. And just to quickly on that, I mean, it's that principle at the core of it is why, if we were to engage in conversation, if you're on opposite sides, you're recognizing that inherent dignity. And so you're going to treat the person on the other side with that. Again, it doesn't mean that you have to agree. That this is actually, it's about disagreeing. We have to disagree. It's what democracy is built on.
Yeah.
But what we know from doing this is that the effect of contempt is that the second I start treating you with contempt, our conversation's over. Even if we keep talking at each other, our conversation is over. To your point of what you're saying, of I want to get to the bottom of this. I want to, think that we can find some solution here. If we treat each other with contempt while we try to get to the bottom of it, there's no chance.
Yeah.
If we treat each other with dignity, it may not resolve in a solution, but we have a chance to get to one.
Right.
And so we're taking this to campuses across the country. It's like we mentioned, it started here at the University of Utah with the pilot project, and we're really trying to empower students to use the Dignity Index to have better dialogue on their campuses, in their communities, hold their politicians, hold their leaders accountable while also holding each other accountable, treating each other with more dignity so we can, like our tagline says, solve problems.
Yeah.
I find it so refreshing because I feel like I'm living in a world that is living in a different reality. It's a contemptuous reality. And if I think about it, it's the things that are the name calling high on my list. Like when you call people names.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the body language.
Yeah.
That you see. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, have you been witnessing this, Shireen, locally? Like, is there someone you would point? We don't need to.
Yeah.
I don't know. You can call out an individual, whatever you want to do. But how do we see this playing out in Utah right now?
To the positive or negative. I'm like, I have lots of examples that come to mind.
I watched the gubernatorial debate, a little while ago, and it was quite dignified. Yeah. It surprised people.
Yeah.
That Phil Lyman and Spencer Cox had just almost a boring discussion, but it was really. I thought it spoke well of both candidates.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I think a lot about, I had to get off Twitter, just, couldn't take it anymore. And I do think a lot of when you reference kind of this industrial complex, like contempt industrial complex, really thrives in spaces like that where you have to be kind of short and quippy to get attention. Right. And I do think that we have plenty of examples. I do think more so on the right. Is that just because we have more people on the right elected in the state? I think that's possible, right? But we have so much of this that happens. And then there are a few Democrats that stand out to me that post in a way that is violating, I think, an overall sense of dignity. But I would say that there is like a very interesting, for me, it feels like largely still, not always, definite exceptions, but in our elected officials, I feel like it's less so. It really is less so, and it is more of this kind of groundswell of people who've gained quite a large following, who really traffic in this and traffic in it to their personal benefit. Like, make no doubt, they are making money off of it. I wanted to shift a little bit to talk about. So we're coming to listeners around the week of the 4th of July. I think that there are so many kind of big themes in our culture that are often also driving division, kind of people experiencing this differently. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about why this work is important to you, or maybe a story that really connects back to what this work means.
Yeah, definitely. So what's so powerful about this work is that I felt when I came into this project, it truly was a group of people from a diverse background with no agenda, trying to make a difference and trying to not be part of the problem, and recognizing that they were part of the problem. And everybody was raising their hand and saying, hey, it's me, it's me, it's me, whether they're Republican, conservative, whatever background. And so I was like, oh, okay, people are being genuine here. It's not, people are acting in good faith. And so it's funny, as I came into this, I still had some of my, I guess, habits of contempt, and there was early on in our work, one of my colleagues who is on a different side of the aisle, we see things almost completely different.
Yeah. And this is Madeline Jones, another one of our field directors.
Yeah, field directors.
On dignity here at the Gardner Institute.
She, we've really developed this friendship, but is somebody who I, before this project, probably would never have chosen as a friend. in our work, the topic of patriotism came up.
Okay.
We were thinking about using this tagline that was, dignity, the foundation of a new patriotism.
Ooh,
And
okay.
the word patriotism stuck out to her. And she was like, hold up, we got to, let's talk about this. And I immediately reverted a little, in that moment at least, I reverted back to, my old habits of, oh, here we go.
Did you feel your eyes roll?
Totally, absolutely. And I was like, here's this, okay, we got to talk about patriotism. Like, what are you talking about?
Everybody loves patriotism.
It's just love of country. Who doesn't love America? Like, what do you why do we even have to talk about this? This is just some woke ideology that now I have to try to defend against. And then we actually had a conversation that I was like, I walked away from, and we've had conversations about it since. I'm like, wow. I now understand. I may not agree. Yeah. I still consider myself patriotic. I love our country, and I'm very, but I can see how, if you look at it from a different perspective, how that word can be a little, I wouldn't say triggering, but it can be controversial. Yeah, complicated. Yeah, exactly. And I now know the nuance of that complication, and can have a conversation about it and understand it from that perspective, instead of just writing her off as, or anybody that would feel that way as, some country-hating woke person, right?
Yeah. So in those conversations, I guess, when you think about what it means to advance a notion of dignity, what do you hope happens?
I think it really is, can we get a norm or move ourselves to this tipping point where it is the norm that in our conversations, in our moments of conflict and disagreement, we recognize the dignity of the other side and we treat them as such. Now, obviously, there's complicated questions. There's really big issues we need to solve in our country. But if we can, get to this point where that's our, innate just kind of default is to just, hey, I'm going to lead with dignity. I'm going to give people the benefit of the doubt, and I'm going to try to have a conversation. I think we'll get to solutions.
Mm-hmm. Shireen, this it has some overtones to our governor, who's been chair of National Governors Association and had as his featured this disagree better.
Yeah. What do you think about these kind of in conversation with each other?
Well, one of the things I love about the Dignity Index is that it can be quantified.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my tradecraft is, data and information. Which disagree better, how do you define that, right?
Right.
But they have some overtones, and the point I was going to try and make is that as Utahns, we have something to offer. We have some light here, and I look at our election cycle we've just been through. There's not been a lot of negative advertising. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's been okay.
I think it's been okay.
It's been better than some past ones that I've seen.
I think that's true.
Yeah.
I think that's true. Again, I would say there's sort of this layer of what's happening on the actual surface, and then what about surrogates, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like what's kind of happening just below the surface. Mm-hmm. And those are often, I think, quite aligned or even sort of in conversation with campaigns. And I do think your premise falls apart, right? Like we know
sure it does. And especially, in the world that we're in right now that is so divided, and where we have, we have cult personalities that are driving extremism.
Yes.
That's a pretty hard one in the dignity world, but
it's hard.
But my thinking was just that it's no accident that the Dignity Index is being pioneered in Utah, that the chair of the NGA picks disagree better.
Yeah.
That this is a state that has the highest measures of trust and networks, social capital of any state.
Yeah.
We're actually better at this than most.
True. But I also have to wonder, I'm curious if there's been an analysis of when you're in places that are more competitive, politically competitive, if this is different. We have one party control in this state. Mm-hmm. So it really is, how hard are individuals of a certain party going to devour the flesh of their own, or is it going to be, whatever? It's not so much across party lines. And I do think that in some ways turns the volume down a little bit. But I also think the most extremists on the left and on the right are in that kind of inner party fighting. And that's why I say just below the surface, it's unhealthy.
Yeah. Preston, is there a passage, a thought leader, someone who's really good at dignified speech, in all the things that you've worked through? I mean, I know Desmond Tutu sometimes pops and different ones, but is there something that our listeners should read that you would recommend?
Oh,
I mean, Martin Luther King.
Yeah. I think you look to all of I would say anyone you could characterize as a bridge builder throughout our history usually scores pretty well on the Dignity Index that leads with, you mentioned MLK, obviously, that the movement, as far as I understand it, was about protest with peace, right? And that's what, to some degree, the Dignity Index is.
The beloved country.
Yeah. It's about standing for what you believe in
Beloved
vigorously,
community.
but doing it in a way that invites other people to do the same.
What should people read? I mean, I love the book Patriotic Grace.
Yeah.
This is by Peggy Noonan. It was way before, some of the problems that we have today. It was written, before that. But it's still this beautiful write-up. It's post 9/11 about how we have to reclaim our patriotism as a country.
Yeah. I hate to do this, but it's kind of a shameless plug. I mean, Tim and our chief strategist wrote a book called The Call to Unite. And it's actually, or they co-edited a book called The Call to Unite because it's a collection of, these passages.
Yeah. So readers, you got something to read. It's been a wonderful conversation. Thanks, Preston. Thanks, Shireen.
Thank you,
Our
Natalie.
program's produced by Anthony Scoma. Thanks, everybody, for listening.